Hello and welcome back to Jimbo's PC Builds. In my first ever video I did an unboxing of the Dark Base 700 from Be Quiet. It was the limited edition white edition. So I finally decided to put my main build into the case to give you a general overview of how good it was to build in, all that kind of good stuff, because I did cover some of the basic features that came with the case in the unboxing. So without further ado, let's have a look what I'm going to put in it. The CPU I've chosen is the AMD 3rd generation Ryzen R5 3600. Bang for your buck, it's the best modern CPU out there, so I'm going to put it in, see how it does and compare it to the current system that I have and see where we go. I'm going to be trying out the MSI X570 Gaming Edge Wifi. That's a mouthful. I've gone for this board because I've heard lots of good things at MSI in the past, and I also went for this one because I've got Wi-Fi included in my current machine and I wanted to make sure I kept it because it's come really in handy. The graphics card I've chosen is the Radeon RX 5700 XT. It's the stock one that AMD have released, which has had some issues with heat, but I'm going to put it into this build nonetheless and I'm going to see how it goes. As recommended with modern Ryzen builds, I've gone for some faster memory. This is 3600 rated memory. Hopefully I'll be able to fully utilize it with the Ryzen CPU, and I'll let you know how that goes. For my operating system, I'm going to run a Samsung 860 Evo. It's a 500 gig drive and should be more than enough for the operating system, and it's pretty damn quick. It's an NVMe drive, so it's better than a normal SATA drive. So for my applications and for my games, I've gone for an Intel SSD 6. It's a 1TB drive. It's going to be a secondary NVMe drive. I've never installed two NVMe drives in a system before, so it's going to be interesting to see how well it does. For cooling, I've gone for a Corsair RM850X power supply. The reason I've gone for it mainly is, to be perfectly honest, is it's white and it'll go with the case. But it's still 80 plus rated. I think it's gold. I'm pretty sure it's gold. Can't see the box that's down there. But it's 80 plus rated, so it's a decent power supply, so and it'll go well with the case. The cooling I've gone for is a Corsair H100i Pro. I've never gone for a double rad cooler before, so it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. The case comes included with 3 Silent Wing fans. I'm not sure if I'm going to utilize those fans or I'm going to use a Corsair RGB set. Because I'm going for a white theme build, I thought that an RGB set, which also probably set to white, would look a little bit better than the Silent Wings. Although the Silent Wings may give me less audio and better performance, I'm going to try both sets out and see where we go. I am, however, for certain going to install the Corsair Light Master Kit, which is going to include a light strip and a header for controlling the profile of the light strip. Because if I do go for the Silent Wings fans, I want to install that to at least give me some light in the case. Otherwise, through the glass panel, it's going to look pretty boring. So that's all the parts I'm going to put into the build. Let's hit to the build B-roll. I'm really pleased with the way the build came out. As you can see behind me, since finishing the build, I've added some additional touches by adding some stencils that I bought from Amazon, adding just a couple of Stormtroopers to it, because those who've seen my keyboard, mouse and mouse mat review from Razer, I do like myself a Stormtrooper. So I would like to, at this stage, to go through a couple of comments on some of the parts that went into the build and an overall summary of how I felt the build went. I've been using it for a couple of weeks to let you know how I feel the system's been performing during that time. So the Be Quiet case, it's large. It's larger than any other case I've had before, and it's really heavy. It was a pleasure to build in, because with that size, you've obviously got a lot of space, there's a lot of channels for cable management, there's a lot of stuff going on in there. There's a nice fan tray that you can pull out from across the top. It's got a built-in fan controller, which was absolutely spectacular. I hooked up all the fans to it. You can leave it in auto mode or have it in either level 1, 2 or 3. If I put it in level 1 mode, it's quite quiet. If I put it in 3, you can hear it audibly. It's really nice on that front. A couple of things that I wasn't too happy about with the case. Well, really, it's just one, and that is that I wanted to put the radiator I was going to put in it at the top, and I was going to use the radiator as an outtake with fans across the front for intake, to give at least 3 intake and 3 outtake to get plenty of air flowing through. Because, to be fair, and highlighting problems again, the one thing I would say about the case is the front is quite choked, so I wanted to put plenty of fans in there. However, I wasn't able to put the radiator across the top because there is only a small gap at the top. There is not a full grate like you get on most cases for air to escape from the top. It's a very small gap, and I felt putting a double radiator across the top with 2 fans trying to get all the air out of one small hole would not have been a good move. So I ended up putting the radiator across the front with 2 fans, and then putting 2 fans for taking air out, which was 1 on the back and 1 at the top by that gap that I mentioned. The H100i cooler, I'd have to say it's a really nice cooler. It was very easy to install. The adapters that came with it from putting it into the socket were really easy. The one thing I would say is you need to be aware of is there's a lot of cables coming from the pump itself. There's RGB power, there's pump power, there's all kinds of power going on. So you've just got to be aware that you're going to need to plan carefully in terms of your cable management when you're going to install a radiator like that. The motherboard, the Gaming Wi-Fi Edge from MSI. It was a good motherboard to work with. I've no complaints so far. There have been reviews from the likes of Hardware Unboxed who have talked about the power delivery not being so great. I've obviously not really seen that because I'm using a Ryzen 3600, so I shouldn't really see any problems with the power delivery that's there. The one thing I would say is, and I've seen this on other boards as well, that I would need to be careful in terms of the fan headers, because there is a pump header, but it's right down the bottom of the board. Now, I've put in the pump in that I had, which obviously is towards the top of the board. I had to use fan extension cables to be able to hook it up to the relevant controller on the board. So just be aware of that. The power supply, it was pretty good. I've not had any problems with it. The one thing I would say, which is something to keep in mind for the Corsair RX 850, the edition I got, which is the white edition, it only contains 6-pin PSU power cables, whereas for most Ryzen, especially the X5700 motherboards, there is both a 6 and a 4 power delivery for the Ryzen 9 3900. So you need to be aware of that, because you may need to get an adapter to be able to plug in and power up that CPU. Being a 3600 in my board, I didn't have any problem with it, but something to keep in mind. Now, originally I was going to put a light strip in there and maybe the fans that originally came with the case. What I ended up doing, I ended up putting 4 Corsair RGB fans in there, purely because I tried using the RGB strip. It just didn't really sit anywhere nice in the case. I had those 3 fans and I thought I bought an extra one, which I did. It looked pretty impressive, and lo and behold, it actually did. So I'm pretty pleased with the way that came out. Adding the RGB strip on the end as well, I think would have been a bit too much, and it would have been overkill. Originally, I bought the Samsung 860 EVO to be as my main drive. Now, I bought that as an NVMe drive. Now, when I bought it, I didn't realize that it's a SATA NVMe drive. Now, I'm going to do a video which will cover this subject in more detail in terms of what's the difference between a PCI Express NVMe and what's a SATA NVMe. But one of the things I've discovered with this board and other boards, not necessarily all, but with a lot of boards, is it's incompatible with the NVMe slot that's closest to the CPU, because the one closest to the CPU is using a PCIe lane, so needs a PCIe NVMe drive. That is a lot of things to consider, and it's a lot of gobbledygook and a lot of letters, but you need to keep that in mind when you're buying one, because the one closest to the CPU is the fastest slot to put in the NVMe drive. It's the one where you want to put your boot drive. So what you don't want to do is put it in the one lower down and boot your machine from that, because you're not really getting the full benefit of NVMe. But again, I'll do a separate video to cover that. The memory that I bought, I was a bit nervous because of the cache latency on it. I've not really noticed any issues. The one thing I would say, and I wasn't aware of when I bought it, it's not on the QML list, which is basically the qualified manufacturer list for the motherboard, which means it's not fully recognized and been tested by the motherboard manufacturer to go with this motherboard. If you're using memory like that, you are taking your chances, because it may not work completely properly with the motherboard. Luckily for me, it did work completely with the motherboard, and I was able to use what's called the XMP profile, and it worked a treat. So just be aware of that, especially when you're talking about new technology like you are with the new Ryzen boards. All right, so in summary, I'm really pleased with the way the build went. Now I've added some nice little bit of bling to the system, set up the white build as I always planned to do, to be perfectly honest, even though I had rainbow to start with. It's looking really sweet. It sits in with my desk really well. The performance from the machine is great. One of the things that was raised about the graphics card when I bought it was the fact that it does generate a bit amount of heat. I've actually noticed that when I've tried it with some games. I've tried it with Warhammer Total War, and I did notice that opening on the case and trying to put my hand on the CPU, it's actually pretty hot. So to be perfectly honest, I did buy this early. I would recommend, if I was you, to buy one of the partner models, because they tend to have better cooling and you won't experience problems like that. Okay, so if you have any comments on the build, please let me know. Comments are always welcome. Also, I put the build on Builds GG. I'll leave a link in the description down below so you can vote my build up, which would be really appreciated. Please subscribe for future content, and as always, please toss a like on the video, because it always helps us to improve the channel. Okay, I hope you like the video, and as always, I will see you in the next one. Take care.